One of the great tragedies of the Hunger Games is the fact that so much of what happened was an effort to protect Prim and her innocence, when in fact, her innocence was gone before the story even started. Prim was already traumatized. She had already lost her dad. She had already emotionally lost her mother. She was already suffering from trauma-induced nightmares. She was already living in fear every single day. And I say this as a youngest sibling who has very protective older sisters. We see and absorb and take to heart everything. While Katniss felt that it was her main responsibility to protect Prim and keep her secure and keep her safe, Prim was doing the same thing for Katniss. She was performing medical care on patients as a 12-year-old and younger, and she learned from her mom, but her mom was also in a state of deep depression and chronic illness, and I can only imagine how much of the work actually ended up falling on Prim and how many patients she had to take care of, especially considering how well she was doing in medical school by the time she was 13, or like whatever training qualified people to be a doctor in District 13. And it's just so tragic because how much of Prim's personality was true innocence and how much of it was a show she was desperately putting on for Katniss so that she could protect her. Dear Diary, today, Peepaw found my Katniss Everdeen and Peeta Mellark fanfiction account. To punish me, he told me he's putting all of the victors back into the reaping bowls. To punish him back, I replaced his hemorrhoid ointment with Icy Hot. Hey, Auntie Tigress, can you come pick me up? Peepaw's mad at Katniss again because she dressed up like a bird, and now he wants to start a civil war. Peepaw, I swear I'm not committing treason. I just want to have wavy hair in the morning. No! Oh my god, leave me alone! Can't take my charm, can't take my humor. Peepaw, everybody knows that song. It's one of the Vault tracks. You know, one of the tracks I got out of the Vault that said Top Secret on it, and then I shared with everybody. Because they're really good, Peepaw! I'm so happy that the war is finally over, and we can all live at peace and in harmony with each other, just like we've all always wanted. You want to hold a symbolic what games? Here's a refresher on some Emily lore for you. But I used to run one of the most popular Drarry blogs on Tumblr. That's Draco Malfoy and Harry Potter, if you did not know for some reason. I was known for fan art, fan fiction, and music. And there are quite a few people who have followed me from Tumblr to TikTok. And if you're one of those people, I see you, and I love you so much. I didn't just do Drarry-related content, though. I also really liked to just commit complete character assassination to all of the Harry Potter characters because I know it would make J.K. Rowling really mad. But the Hermione shippers and the Drarry shippers were like mortal enemies. We would get in the fiercest arguments on Tumblr. It was insane. Like, I've gotten some pretty nasty DMs on TikTok. None of them compare to the things I would get in my ask box from Hermione shippers every single time I posted something Drarry related on Tumblr. But my legacy stands. I still see my fan art and my fan fiction and my Tumblr posts and stuff resurface every time I see something Drarry related in my feed. And every time I see it, I want to be like, oh my god, I made that! Or, oh my god, I know the person who made that! We're pen pals! Those were my teenage years, man. Those were the days. But then J.K. Rowling ruined everything. But now I'm a Haymitch Effie shipper, so all is well. What are the recent works of fiction that teenage girls are being made fun of for enjoying right now? Genuine question. Because I see this pattern year after year after year where there will be a very popular piece of media that takes teenage girls by storm, that everybody makes fun of them for enjoying. And then a decade after they all get made fun of for enjoying it, it becomes a classic. And it has some kind of renaissance, and then all of a sudden everybody really likes it. Like back in the 30s and 40s, people called the girls who were obsessed with Frank Sinatra Bobby Soxers because they would always take part in these silly fads and trends and things. They weren't taken seriously at all, even though a lot of those trends lasted through the years. People who once raked Twilight fans through the coals just for enjoying Twilight are now visiting Stephenie Meyer's writing for the very first time and realizing that it's not as bad as we all made it out to be, especially when you measure it up to other famous works of literature and you realize that it's actually not nearly as bad as you thought. And once again, I'm seeing this with the Hunger Games. I've seen like 4 or 5 YouTube videos within the last week come out being like, the Hunger Games was a lot deeper than we thought it was, you guys. Like, oh my god. Dude, catch up. The teen girls who have been consuming and living and breathing this book series since it came out, we have all known the depth of this series, which is why we love it so much. And we have been made fun of relentlessly for really loving teen dystopia and wanting to be like Katniss Everdeen and, you know, we all have a chosen one, I'm not like other girls complex, when really, it is literally just an incredible series. And none of us are ever taken seriously as teenage girls for having interests. So I want to know what piece of media teenage girls are being made fun of for enjoying right now. And I want to be there in a decade when inevitably there is a renaissance of whatever piece of media this is, and everybody all of a sudden loves it and realizes that it wasn't as shallow as they thought it was. This boy I'm obsessed with is acting mysterious, and I could mind my own business and probably save myself a lot of legal problems, but instead, I'm going to get involved. Well, that backfired tremendously. This girl I'm obsessed with is acting slightly different than usual, and I could ignore it because it's probably just because we're running away from home and multiple of her friends have died in the last week, or I could just fire my gun into the air, because what if she's trying to kill me? This girl I've become obsessed with now poses a threat to our government, and instead of just executing her, I'm going to put her in a dome with all of her friends and a bunch of traps that have very clear, correct answers to escape from, and I don't see how this could possibly go wrong for me. For some reason in the last 75 years, we haven't learned that it's maybe a bad idea to put the people who hate our government on live national television. So now the entire country loves Katniss and wants to start an uprising. And I would have gotten away with it too, if it weren't for Plutarch and you meddling kids. There's been a lot of talk about silly moments in the Hunger Games movies on the internet lately, and you want to know what I think the all-time silliest moment in all of the Hunger Games movies is? Like, genuinely the thing I think about the most in regards to the Hunger Games movies is the end of Catching Fire, right after Katniss shoots her arrow into the force field, and she has collapsed, is bleeding out of probably a fairly major artery of some kind. And the hovercraft has not arrived yet. And she is just laying underneath an unimaginably massive infrastructure that is falling apart around her, and somehow manages to evade being trapped or hit by any of the falling flaming rebar. It's so cinematic, but I also just think it's so funny because it's all perfectly falling just around her, just like the fog. It like perfectly wrapped around the whole group. It was really cinematic, but like, that's not how that would work, Francis. That's silly. Alright, so the Hunger Games fan base is growing pretty fast and they want to know what all the ship names of all of the characters are. Okay, what do we have? Katniss and Peeta? Cat pee. Are you sure? Either that or penis. Okay, what about Gale and Katniss? Gayness. Is there no other option you could go with? Absolutely not. Okay, what about Coriolanus and Lucy Gray? Lucanus. I really don't think Luciolanus. Okay, what about Sejanus and Coriolanus? I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? Please don't. Anus. Why not Coriolanus? Why else would they both have the word anus in their name? Okay, there has to be one that won't sound weird. What about Coriolanus' dad and Casca Highbottom? You mean Crassus Snow and Casca Highbottom? Two boys who also have the word ass in their name? Come on, there has to be something else you can do with it. Snowbottom. Okay, there has to be a ship name that's gonna sound good. What about Finnick and Annie? Fanny. Alright, so the Hunger Games fan base is growing pretty fast and they want to know what all the ship names of all of the characters are. Okay, what do we have? Katniss and Peeta? Cat pee. Are you sure? Either that or penis. Okay, what about Gale and Katniss? Gayness. Is there no other option you could go with? Absolutely not. Okay, what about Coriolanus and Lucy Gray? Lucanus. I really don't think Luciolanus. Okay, what about Sejanus and Coriolanus? I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? Please don't. Anus. Why not Coriolanus? Why else would they both have the word anus in their name? Okay, there has to be one that won't sound weird. What about Coriolanus' dad and Casca Highbottom? You mean Crassus Snow and Casca Highbottom? Two boys who also have the word ass in their name? Come on, there has to be something else you can do with it. Snowbottom. Okay, there has to be a ship name that's gonna sound good. What about Finnick and Annie? Fanny. Here is who I would cast as all of the Hunger Games characters. For Katniss, we have Ariana Grande. Peeta would be played by Adam Devine, and Gale would be played by SpongeBob. Haymitch would be played by Jimmy Fallon. Effie would be played by Trisha Paytas, and Prim would be played by John Travolta. President Snow would be played by George Santos. And now we can get into all of the tributes. For District 1, we have Jeffree Star and Laura Lee. For District 2, the Property Brothers and Glitter Forever 17, my DIY queen. On to District 3, Technology, we have Dream and SS Sniper Wolf. Moving on to District 4, Seafood, we have David Schwimmer and Kim Kardashian looking for her earring in the ocean. For District 5, Power, we have James Charles and Poot Lovato. On to District 6, Transportation, Justin Bieber on a scooter and Toxic Gossip Train. For District 7, Lumber, we have Axel Weber and Martha Stewart. District 9, we have Cake Boss and Freely the Banana Girl. District 10, Livestock, Shane Dawson and Finnaby and the Pit Girl. District 11, Agriculture, we have Timothy Chalamet and that person who was asked to name a yellow fruit on Family Feud and said orange. Last, and certainly not least, we have Buttercup, who would of course be played by James Corden in his cat's outfit. Let me know what you think. Welcome to the stage, Haymitch. Now tell me, how do you plan on winning the 50th Hunger Games? Well, Caesar, seeing as I don't have much of a choice in the matter, I will do it simply by staying alive. Oh, you cheeky bastard! But what is your strategy? What are you going to do once you're in the arena? The arena? You mean the death maze you're putting a bunch of blindfolded innocent children in? Ah, yes, it's a maze indeed. And how do you intend on winning? Caesar, have you ever heard the phrase, country boys make and do? I'm afraid I have not. Is that a phrase from your people? Yes, and seeing as I am a country boy, I will be making do. Well, I'm sure whatever it is you do, it will be endlessly entertaining for us all. Well, Caesar, what y'all call entertainment, I call throwing a bunch of innocent little kitties into an arena while y'all sip fancy drinks and stick your thumbs up your hoo-haws. Those are some very strong words, Haymitch. Thank you for sharing your feelings. Is there anything that you have that might give you an advantage in the arena? My charm, my devastatingly good looks, and my ability to make the Capitol absolutely love me until they hate me. As requested, here are more Effie and Haymitch headcanons for you. Once again, a disclaimer that headcanons are not actually canon. These are just things I'm making up. Yes, Effie and Haymitch do raise a happy flock of geese together. And I think once the town starts getting rebuilt, and there's more people living there, they get little harnesses for them and put leashes on them and take them for walks. And for Christmas, Effie gets Haymitch one of those t-shirts that says like #1 Goose Dad or something. One year for her birthday, Katniss and Peeta get Effie a Kindle Fire and they teach her how to download Candy Crush and YouTube. And then a few days later, they walk in to find her making slime in her kitchen. When Haymitch and Effie first start living together, they realize that neither of them ever actually learned how to cook, so they decide to follow an enchilada recipe together. And all is going well until the recipe tells them to fold in the cheese, and that's like the first yelling fight they ever get into as a couple. Haymitch, you fold in the cheese. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Just fold it in, Haymitch. Let me know if you want more of these.
I keep seeing people doing the Hunger Games ranking thing, and they always rank Gale below Snow. And it just goes to show that you can be the most horrendous, murderous, evil dictator on the planet, and yet there is still no greater literary crime than being annoying.
This video is in defense of Gale Hawthorne. And before you guys bite my head off, I
I didn't say I liked him or thought he was a good person. I've talked on here before about how I feel that Gale is extremely misunderstood as a character. And maybe this is part of because of how he's portrayed in the movies, but I hear a lot of people talking about him as if he's this unfeeling, cold-hearted, vengeful, angry person without a reason for it, and he just whines the entire time. And like, Gale set out to kill Prim, and he knew exactly what was gonna happen from the beginning, and he knew that Prim was gonna be in the explosion. Yes, Liam Hemsworth does little for the movies other than having eyebrows the entire time, but Liam Hemsworth is not my Gale. Gale became the sole provider for his family when he was the same age as an 8th grader. And for his entire life up until then, he had known nothing except poverty and insecurity. And he was constantly having the threat of what would happen if he did not provide for his family hanging over his head, because he saw what happened to the families in the Seam who were unable to provide for their families. And in a world where the entire country was an arena, Katniss was really the first ally Gale ever had. And for a long time, their relationship wasn't a friendship relationship, it was an ally relationship. They didn't even really acknowledge their closeness to each other until Katniss had to go into the games, and they had their last meeting before she left. We see right away that he has an extremely strong sense of justice. He has no qualms about shouting treasonous things in the woods, even though they very well could and were being watched at some point. Then he had to watch his one ally go into the games and then have to perform a love story for the entire country when he knew what was really going on the entire time. Then he was roped into performing for the Capitol as her cousin when he, just like Katniss, did not want to do that. And then he had to watch his entire town be completely demolished, as well as almost all of his people, and only escaped with his family and a few other survivors, and was put as the leader of these survivors when he didn't really necessarily ask to be put in that position. He was a teenager. He was just doing what he needed to do for his own and other people's survival. And it was Gale escaping with the few survivors and his family members that started making me think about Gale as a war strategist. Say what you will about whether he is a good person, but Gale is a brilliant war strategist. And he was younger than I am now when all of this was happening to him. It's not surprising at all to me that when he got to District 13, Coin saw that anger and bloodthirstiness and vengeance that he had stirring inside of him at something that would very, very validly make somebody very vengeful and bloodthirsty, and exploited it. And then in the middle of all of this, his one ally, his one confidant, the person he has literally been able to depend on for everything, the one person he can depend on, is with somebody else now. And I totally understand that Gale's response to this was totally immature. But we have to be examining this through the lens of a deeply, deeply traumatized person who just lost the one thing that keeps him emotionally secure. Is it toxic? Yes. But would I probably react similarly if I was in Gale's position and had just gone through what Gale had gone through? Also, probably yes. Do I like Gale as a person? No. Do I think he is a fantastic and misunderstood character? Yes. Okay, so there was an ancient prophecy told about Katniss that said that she would one day overthrow the government. But it also could have been about this girl named Madge, so the president created an entire Death Games just so that one day Katniss would hopefully volunteer for it, and just in case, he also institutionalized Madge's parents, and then by the end, they figured out that they were basically wrong about everything. Mr. Everdeen and Mr. Malark, they were best friends. They were really, really close, good friends who loved each other. Sponsors in the arena? No. But sometimes if you stand in exactly the right spot and you think really, really, really hard about what you want, a parachute will appear. And sometimes it has the thing that you need. Okay, I have to clear some things up. The head game maker position was not an insecure job, okay? The position was just cursed, and Katniss was the one that broke it. Why would the Hunger Games end when the series ends? It's the title of the book. Of course they keep going. After the war, Joanna has some kids, and then Katniss has some kids, and then their kids become best friends against all odds, and then for some reason they decide to start time traveling together, and they fuck up everything for everybody. My Gale fan cast, you ask? Boo Boo Stewart. I've been working on my own fan cast for the Hunger Games, and I'm not even close to done because this actually takes a lot of time and effort. but I feel very confident in my casting decision here. What do you think? Here's why I think Boo Boo Stewart would make a great Gale Hawthorne. First of all, I think it's extremely important for Gale to be played by somebody with Native American heritage, and it was really disheartening that they strayed away from that in the original movies. Second of all, Boo Boo Stewart is a really likable actor. A lot of people I've seen really want the Hunger Games characters to be portrayed by people who actually look the age of the characters they're playing. I do not agree with that. Not only do I think children don't have a place in Hollywood, I also just think it would be really disturbing to watch that unfold on a screen with children, and would ultimately kind of defeat the purpose of the message in the books. But I think Boo Boo's likability would add to the innocence of Gale's character at the beginning of the series, because Boo Boo Stewart isn't a dislikable person as an actor. A really big part of why I cannot stand Gale as a character is because of how Liam Hemsworth portrayed him. And I think Boo Boo Stewart would be able to give him that depth and development that was really missing in the original films. And my last reason is because when I read the books, this is the face I picture for Gale. I don't know, this is just how he's described, what he looks like to me. When he was described as having straight black hair, I imagined him with long black hair. I don't know, this is just who I imagine as Gale. I think he would do a really good job playing Gale.
Here's who I would cast as the Hunger Games characters. I have not finished my list yet, this is just what I have so far. For Katniss, I would have Arana James, who, if you have watched The Wilds, she plays Tony. I think she would be a fantastic Katniss. I think a young Hunter Parrish would be a perfect Peeta. And if I remember correctly, there was speculations that he was going to get the role of Peeta before it was given to Josh Hutcherson, but I could have been making that up, I don't know. I think at this point he would be a little bit too old to play the character, but a younger version of him, like when he was in his Silas Botwin era, I think would be amazing. For Gale, Boo Boo Stewart, I've already covered that. I would cast Evangeline Lilly as Mrs. Everdeen, not only because I think she would be really good as the role, but also the other Mrs. Everdeen was also in Lost, so I feel like having another actress from Lost would be fitting. I would cast Elle Graham as Primrose, not only because I just think she would be such a great Primrose, but if you remember, she played the girl with the yellow coat at the end of Mockingjay Part 2, and her scene is literally the most haunting and devastating scene in the entire Hunger Games franchise to me. I can't even talk about it too much because I will start crying. I would cast Pedro Pascal as Haymitch. I just think he would be a great Haymitch. I don't think I should even need to explain this one. And I would cast Retta as Effie because I think she would kill this role. It's really hard for me to imagine anybody other than Elizabeth Banks in this role because she fleshed out the character so much, but I think that Retta would do her some serious justice. That's all I have for my serious fan cast so far. I do have some silly ones, but yeah, I'm gonna keep working on it. Let me know who your fan casts are in the comments.
In the Hunger Games, why did Districts 1, 2, and 4 have career tributes while the rest of the districts didn't? In Panem, training specifically to go into the Hunger Games was illegal, but because Districts 1, 2, and 4 were favorable with the Capitol and financially well off, the Capitol turned a blind eye to it. I also think that they didn't really care as much about whether or not they were following the law because the resources that they provided the Capitol weren't really necessities, they were luxuries. So they didn't necessarily need to be pushing every single person into the workforce of whatever that district produced. And in places like District 11, you have children going into the workforce as soon as they're old enough to say the word work. But also, the career tributes really glamorized the games, and they were trained from day one how to basically bring the entertainment factor to the television screen. Not only that, the 3 career districts also had a distinct disadvantage compared to the rest of the tributes, in that they had never experienced food insecurity before. So while they were prepared for physical combat, they were in no way prepared for the actual survival in the elements part of the games. And so I think they also allowed it to continue to happen to add that element of additional conflict. And that's not to say that training like a career never happened in other districts, we just don't know, and having a volunteer in any other district other than the career districts was incredibly rare.
Someone commented under my video saying, you guys think that everything is leading to World War III. We are in World War III. They're just not saying it. America is at war with Russia, China, Iran. The battleground is just the Middle East and in Africa. They're fighting over resources, over power, over control, over these regions.
I interviewed a woman from Tigray, a woman from Congo, a woman from Sudan. And in each of these interviews, I asked them, who is supporting and funding the wars and genocide in your country? It's always the same players: the US, Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Turkey, Russia, China, all of the European nations. How are you not able to see that we are at World War III? And the reason it's not happening in mainland is because of nuclear weapons. Everybody has nuclear weapons, and nobody wants to have nuclear war. That's like me and you are in a pool of gasoline, and you have 10 cigarettes and I have one. Does it matter who lights up first? Like, you guys do know that when they created the atomic bomb, they weren't certain if the atomic bomb was going to destroy the entire planet, right? And they still used it. Not certain if the atomic bomb was going to destroy the entire world, because they felt like they knew what was best. They felt like the threat of Nazi Germany was greater than the atomic bomb. And they risked all of our lives. They fucked with all of our lives, completely played with our lives. And here we are in present day, where now countries around the world don't just have atomic bombs, they have nuclear bombs, which is 10 times more explosive. And it's in the hands of the most dangerous people in the world. And so many of us are trying to ring the alarm to get you guys to care, because they're not going to announce to us that, hey, we're at World War III and cause chaos. No, they're not going to do that. So we're trying to sound the alarm, right? So that your kids might possibly have a future. And the response back from people is just that we are being dramatic, that we think that everything is leading to World War III. Like, the privilege of being so ignorant, my God. Like, the privilege in just saying stupid shit like, I don't watch the news. Like, that's a flex. It's not a flex. We are in World War III. Look around. You don't want to watch the news? Well, listen to what people just look at what's happening to people. Look at these videos coming out. We are reaching a peak in history. Like, I cannot even comprehend the ignorance right now. The ignorance of people who live in the Western world.
Did Sony make Madame Web badly on purpose so that they wouldn't have to make female-led superheroes anymore? So that they could say, they don't do well, see? We don't have to do them anymore. I don't think so. I don't think it's as easy as that. I don't think it's because these studio executives respect women as a target audience or as a group of people at all. But I think that it's the real answer is a lot more insidious and under the surface than something as simple as that. I understand the temptation behind this line of thinking. The glass cliff is something that's been talked about a lot. This concept of, if the ship is already going down, that's when they make a woman a captain. Because when the ship sinks and they ask, well, who was in charge of the ship, they can point to a woman. That is something that absolutely happens. But in the case of Hollywood films, their main motivator is money. Like, it doesn't really matter. They're not really serving any agenda other than to make money. So the idea that a studio would self-sabotage in order to purposefully distance themselves from, like, a paying market, I don't think is realistic in this case. What I do think is that studio executives don't really believe that women make up a large percentage of their target audience, which is bullshit because, as we've known, as we've seen with the popularity of the MCU, women make a huge percentage of these fan bases for this specific kind of movie. But because they don't really believe that women are going to show up for films like this, they are desperate to cast as wide a net as possible. They are going to pander to their existing audience, the audience that they think is their bread and butter, which is young men. They're going to slap a feminist billboard on this and have all of the women on the press tour talk about how important it is that this is from a female perspective, but they're going to have Sydney Sweeney in an anime schoolgirl outfit the entire time, and they're going to create a narrative that is not challenging to male viewers at all. I also think specifically in this case with Sony, you can look at their recent track record and see that it just, in order to successfully make a bad movie, you have to understand what makes a movie work. And I don't think with their recent string of films, they know what they're doing at all. I think they're throwing things at a wall and seeing what sticks. That said, what's so harmful about this really under the surface level of implicit bias and misogyny on a systemic level is that these people genuinely don't believe that women are worth their time as far as a market worth pursuing, as far as an audience even trying to understand like what they want and what women want to see on screen. That's the real issue that drives me crazy. I don't think that Sony executives or any executives are trying to distance themselves from a female market. I think they don't view us as valuable enough. Now, in the case of Madame Web, obviously there's a lot more to complain about with this film than just the way women are represented on screen, but I do think it plays into this pattern that we've seen in recent years, this phenomenon of the strong female character that seems to be the only female archetype that studios are willing to fund these days. In my most recent episode of The Broad Perspective, I talk all about Madame Web and female-led superhero movies and how this trope is aging, how the strong female character, this idea of an overcorrection of the frivolous chick flicks of the early 2000s, has kind of done a disservice to the progress we're trying to make in achieving authentic and meaningful representation for women on screen. I talk a lot about it in my recent podcast episode, which is called Madame Web and the Strong Female Character Problem. If you want to check it out, it's streaming everywhere.
This is something I've seen directed towards numerous female actresses on the show, and whenever I see it happen, my blood curdles because I feel the overwhelming majority of people have forgotten what a teenager is supposed to look like. I am so sorry that a character that's supposed to be under the age of 16 does not have Angelina Jolie's bone structure at 30. How dare you be a young actress on the rise and not suck out every ounce of buccal fat? Although recent teenage dramas and teen-centric shows and movies have gotten a lot better at this, we still have literal decades of film and television where the high school-aged characters are played by actors over 25. And it's something that did and continues to distort people's base perception of what children look like. There's a reason we associate a slightly fuller, rounder face with youth, and that's because children often have one. Even people in their late teens still typically have it. And if you're in your late teens currently and going, "No, I don't, I look like a grown adult," please wait, age 4 years, go back and look at old pictures of yourself and know that I was right. But the other big trend I see attached to this phenomenon, and I saw it happen with The Last of Us, is people that are genuinely upset that they are not attracted to these underage characters. Do you remember the fan backlash to Bella Ramsey playing Ellie from The Last of Us? The kind that said that she wasn't attractive enough to play Ellie? A 14-year-old girl? This gives me deja vu to that in the worst possible way. And there is no other critique I'll commonly see that'll send me soaring away from the person as fast as humanly possible.
They couldn't save Hind Rajab, the little girl whose emergency call we all heard as she reached out for help as her car was surrounded by Israeli soldiers and the car was filled with the bodies of her loved ones. They couldn't save her. It wasn't for lack of effort. It's because the IOF unalived the 2 Red Crescent paramedics who were there to save her, kept them from getting to her, and then unalived her. They recently found their bodies. It is only in this timeline, in this scenario, in this place that a little girl can cry out for help and not get it. Not because people weren't fast enough, not because people didn't try, not because they couldn't, but because they weren't allowed to and paid with their life trying to. And it's only in this scenario that we're told that the people who made sure that this little girl suffered alone, scared, in a car filled with bodies are supposed to be the good guys. Her call for rescue didn't just go unanswered, it was intentionally declined, and our governments continue to support this and continue to fund this. There are no words for this loss, but as every single day gets bleaker and bleaker in ways we never thought possible, now is not the time to stop or get complacent or just write the Palestinians off as already gone. Beyonce dropped new music. Y'all, during the Super Bowl, Beyonce dropped 2 new songs at the same time that Israel was dropping bombs on Rafah. Yes, you heard me right. While we were all distracted with the Super Bowl and Usher and Beyonce's new music, Israel took this opportunity to launch an unprecedented deadly attack on the most densely populated city in the world right now. If you didn't already know, Rafah is the most southern point in all of Palestine that you can go before you have to hit Egypt, meaning that all the people that were told to evacuate had nowhere to go because they couldn't afford to cross over into Egypt. And while we were all looking at the Super Bowl and all of the lights and performances, Israel took this opportunity to bomb Rafah, currently home to 1.4 million displaced Palestinians. This is not something that happens on coincidence. Every attack these last 4 months where Palestinians were essentially herded into this last safe space, every ceasefire call that went unanswered, every hostage negotiation that failed was leading up to this, where they waited until we were all so distracted with one of the most popular nights on TV to launch this attack with the knowledge that we would not be looking and likely not hear about it because we weren't paying attention. Don't let that be the case. I know, Beyonce's new music is so exciting. 2 new songs and a new album in March. Thrilling. But don't let that be the most important thing in the news cycle right now. Because the most important thing right now is what's happening in Rafah. It absolutely matters that people are tuned into the Super Bowl and not paying attention to what was happening in Rafah. Not because they were watching the Super Bowl, but because they are unaware of what was happening in Rafah. In all honesty, on this day, at this point, in this moment, there's likely very little that we could have done to prevent the attack from happening in Rafah tonight, meaning that by not tuning into the Super Bowl, you couldn't have automatically prevented the bombing from happening. That's not the way that would have worked. But instead, I want you guys to think about, and walk with me here, how little we know about slavery. We all know the elementary friendly level of slavery. Black folk were brought over here, forced to work in the hot sun on fields, separated from their families, blah, 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 blah. But we don't know the true horrors unless we look. And it's really hard to look because no one documented it. We don't talk about the fact that they used to cut enslaved people's hair and put it into pillows and mattresses. We don't talk about the fact that fat phobia is connected to blackness and slavery. We don't talk about the breeding farms where Black women had to get pregnant and stay pregnant to make enough enslaved people. We don't talk about that. And it's because no one was documenting it. No one was writing it down. No one wanted to talk about it. It made it easier to get away with it. And that same logic is applicable here. We likely could not have prevented tonight just by not watching the Super Bowl. But if we don't pay attention and don't know that it happened, it makes it incredibly easy for them to spin a narrative where they are not the villains, or it wasn't that bad, or it wasn't their fault, or they were doing it to, end terrorism, or what the narrative is. If we don't pay attention, they get the narrative. And we see how that played out for Black folk in the United States. We see, the enslavement deniers to this day. We see how that has played out. And so we have to stay aware, if nothing else, so that we can make sure that history tells the truth this time. So the other day, my mom says to me, people made the world bad, so I believe people can make the world good again. And in the context of the conversation we were having, that was so hopeful. But what really resonated with me was also the first part. People make the world bad. And I think we need to sit with that for a second. As we've been talking about what's been happening in Palestine for the last over 120 days and what's happening in Rafah for the last 24 hours, I see a lot of people who are like, OMG, like the IOF is evil, they're monsters, they're demonic. And I understand the impulse, but we have to remember that they are just people. Like, it kind of reminds you of the realization growing up that, like, the soldiers who committed these horrible atrocities that we hear about and learn about in textbook, or, like, the worst police officer that you can think of, aren't these, like, evil, monstrous people. It's, like, Chad from English class that you went to school with. And while it's really jarring, I think that's really important. My mutual nurse, Connor, go follow them if you don't already. They are Palestinian and do an amazing and devastating job of covering all of the news that we've heard. Made a video on this same idea earlier that's much better than mine, where they talked about, the idea of labeling Israel and the IOF as evil and how that creates this distance of the humanity between them and us, and therefore like us and our perception of the world. And I don't know, what my mom said just really sat with me as people are like, oh my gosh, this is so evil and these are monsters and these are not humans. They absolutely are. They are regular, degular people. And I think we really need to sit with that and unpack like what it means to be capable of something so dark and so horrendous. I don't know, I just think it's important that we sit with the fact that they are not some once-in-a-lifetime evil that will never pass again. They're literally just human beings. And once we address that they are humans and unpack how they got here and how we got here and how people are capable of such horrors, only then can we start to get to a state where we will actually never do this again. Because the track that we're on right now, we will do this pretty often. January 22nd is a day that most of us, me included, likely never think about. In fact, it might have passed you by without you even noticing. But that day changed U.S. history because in 1973, the Supreme Court released their landmark decision in the Roe v. Wade case, giving everybody in the nation access to safe abortions. And that was then, and now, an overwhelmingly good thing. In fact, 85% of people in the U.S. still believe that abortion should be legal, and in the 2 years since Roe v. Wade has been overturned, the reproductive healthcare landscape has changed for the worse. I remember when Roe v. Wade was first overturned, my friends and I agreed that we would pick each other up and take each other to whatever state we needed to get to in case our state banned abortions. Thankfully, that hasn't happened to us yet, but that's not the case for so many. Right now, a third of women and even more trans and non-binary people have lost their access to abortions as bans have eliminated some or all abortions in 21 states. Now, 1 out of every 5 people seeking abortions have to travel out of state, as opposed to the 1 out of every 10 that it was before Dobbs overturned Roe v. Wade. January 22nd, 1973 was supposed to mark the beginning steps towards an equitable healthcare future, the floor instead of an impenetrable iron ceiling. And it still is. We just can't give up the fight. Not when so many of our healthcare access is on the line.
Yesterday, our military operation in Rafah, the major military operation in Rafah.
If you've been wondering why you as an American are supposed to care about what's happening in Rafah and Palestine right now outside of the obvious human care and connection thing, he just told you it's not their military operation, it's ours. So just know that while your tax dollars could be going towards something like free healthcare, addressing the homelessness crisis, making adequate school lunches for kids, addressing the infrastructure problem, and fixing the holes in the roads, literally anything, your tax dollars are funding our military operation. Let me know how you feel about that. Reminder, it's not a war if the people that you're fighting against have no army, no military, and no adequate way to fight back. It's not a war if over half of the people that you've killed aren't even your main targets. They're civilians. It's not a war if 40% of your casualties that you've created are children whose images we see of them, being trapped in cars and then killed after you gave the green light for them to be saved and then kill the people saving them. If those same children we see images of, cute pictures of them running and playing, and then hours later see them hanging from buildings, their limbs severed from their bodies, that's not a war. It's not a war if you're targeting hospitals and schools and safe zones that you designated as safe. War has rules. War has order. War has a reason and a purpose, and you're obviously not trying to get your lick back or protect anything or defend anyone, or heaven knows you're not trying to get your hostages back. That's not the point here. So you can't call this a war. This is a genocide, and we need to start calling it what it is. The genocide happening in the Congo and the war that's happening in Sudan are not gotcha moments for you to use to shut up other people when they talk about what's happening in Palestine. And that is an incredibly disrespectful and disingenuous thing that y'all keep doing. A man in November lit himself on fire, self-immolation, to draw attention to the genocide happening in Congo. Do you know how awful things have to be for you to light yourself on fire with the hopes that someone will pay attention to you? Over 1 million people have been displaced in the Congo from the violence. People die left and right in the mines. There are children as young as 4 mining for things like cobalt. And in Sudan, in 6 months alone, 9,000 people were killed, 5.6 million displaced. The sexual violence crisis is just, you can't even speak of it. You cannot fathom the crisis happening. And yet, whenever people, namely Black folk, but not exclusively, post about Palestine and the video starts to get traction, the comments start to say, okay, but do you talk about what's happening in Congo? Do you talk about what's happening in Sudan? And it's like, if that was a genuine question from a genuine place, that's a conversation worth having. But it never is. And I've gotten the genuine ask, hey, can you talk about this? Hey, this is really important too. Here are some resources to know more. Yeah, dude. In fact, sure. In fact, done. But that really disingenuous, okay, but are you talking about this? Or are you only talking about Palestine because XYZ ABC explanation? Usually is so disingenuous. It comes usually on a post holding people accountable and they don't want to be held accountable. And it usually comes from people who are also not talking about what's happening in Congo and Sudan. And that's how I know it's not genuine, because you don't really care enough to speak on it either. You just don't want us talking about Palestine because you don't want to hear about it anymore. And that's disingenuous, not only to the Palestinian people, but to the people in Sudan and to the people in Congo, because their lives matter. They matter enough to not be a footnote and a gotcha comment at the bottom of somebody else's post. These are their own posts, their own movement, their own attention. And you can draw attention to that. You can be a part of that, instead of using them as some cheap gotcha moment. Stop it. 3 days ago, an Alabama Supreme Court decided that a frozen embryo, which is about the size of a vanilla bean seed or a grain of sugar off a sugar cookie, is a baby and has the same rights and privileges as a living person. Shortly after that, Texas lawmakers decided to opt out of the 2024 free summer school lunch program that would give food to poor kids in the summer. But a few days before this, Indigenous and non-binary teenager Next Benedict was beaten so badly in a school bathroom during the school day that they were killed. Beaten at school in Oklahoma. And again, this is in Oklahoma, a state that is known for its incredibly abundant anti-trans rhetoric and anti-trans laws, many of which were passed under the guise of protecting children. And even before that, the United States vetoed yet another ceasefire, a ceasefire that would end the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people, one where Palestinian people are literally being starved to death intentionally and deliberately, so much so that even within the last 24 hours, a 45-day-old baby died from lack of nutrition, from not having enough formula and milk. And all this happened within the last month. It doesn't touch on the degradation of the education system across the country. It doesn't touch on the constantly changing labor laws that are allowing children later and later to work more and more extreme hours. It doesn't touch on the decades of starvation that children in the United States are facing. It doesn't touch on the fact that they don't have access to clean water. All of this happened in the last month. If either side cared about kids, you would know by now.
So you guys know how like Arab Jewish Israelis often say that they had to flee to Israel because they were being persecuted in Arab Muslim lands? So this is Avi Shalem, a British Israeli historian who wrote a new book about how the Israeli Mossad carried out bombs and terrorist attacks in Iraq to drive out Iraqi Jewish people to move and populate the new apartheid state of Israel. So in Avi's memoir, he states that there is undeniable proof of Zionist involvement in the terrorist attacks which prompted a mass exodus of Jews from Iraq between 1950 and 1951. This is another article that I think everyone should go read. It was an interview of Naim Giladi, a Jew from Iraq, who was formerly an Israeli. He talks about how the Israeli Mossad, the Zionist movement, participated in planting bombs in Iraq to drive out Iraqi Jews to move to the newly apartheid state of Israel. It says here, in an attempt to portray the Iraqis as anti-American and to terrorize the Jews, the Zionists planted bombs in the U.S. Information Service Library and in synagogues. Soon leaflets began to appear urging Jews to flee to Israel. Although the Iraqi police later provided our embassy with evidence to show that the synagogue and library bombings, as well as the anti-Jewish and anti-American leaflet campaigns, had been the work of an underground Zionist organization, most of the world believed that reports that Arab terrorism had motivated the flight of the Iraqi Jews whom the Zionists rescued, really just in order to increase Israel's Jewish population. I think it's really important to point out that Arab Jews and Muslims and Christians all lived in harmony in the Middle East prior to the apartheid state of Israel being created. There was a Zionist movement that led to the mass exodus of Arab Jews to leave their countries all throughout the Middle East, from Morocco, Yemen, Egypt, Iraq, Iran, and to flee to the apartheid state of Israel because they needed to populate this new state to combat the Palestinians that were living on the land. They needed to populate this state to drive out Palestinians whose homes that they were occupying, and they convinced Arab Jewish people and European Jewish people that this land belonged to them. So whenever you hear Arab Jewish people start saying that they were persecuted in Arab lands and from their home country, which is why they had to go live in the apartheid state of Israel, remember to tell them that it was the Israeli Mossad that planted these bombs, that planted these terrorist attacks to drive them out purposely. So this is Ben Hameen, a Israeli French soldier. This is his dating profile picture. And behind him is the lingerie of Palestinian women in Gaza, which he stole, and he posted it. He not only posted it, he put up their lingerie on the wall and then decided to take a picture. He asked his friend, hey, take a picture of me with Palestinian women's lingerie clothing hanging on the wall. I think it's so safe to say that Israelis are fucking obsessed. They're obsessed with rape. They're obsessed with sexual assault. They're obsessed with Palestinian women and their modesty. They're obsessed with Muslim women and their modesty. Like, they cannot comprehend how a Muslim woman would want to save these parts of herself for her husband, that they could actually own lingerie. Like they cannot even comprehend that Palestinian women would have lingerie. Like they're like, oh my God, these women who have hijabs, like they would own this type of stuff. Like they cannot comprehend it. So when they see it, when they go through their clothing, which is fucking disgusting, they would go out of their way to fucking hang it up on a wall and take a picture of it. Like, it's so disgusting. And think about, if this is what they're showing us, think about what they're doing. Think about what they do when we don't see them. Think about all the things that they do to Palestinian women that we don't ever get to see.
When I see people making comments like this about the actors in the Avatar live action, I'm convinced it means they've never met an Asian in real life and they think all Asians look like they do in anime, or like they've only seen the minority of Asians with like really sharp angled features that Hollywood likes to cast and that like fashion magazines prefer to cast. I'm sorry, but lots of Asians have naturally rounder features. When I first saw who they cast, my first thought was like, oh, they look like the animated versions. Like their faces looked like normal Asian faces to me. I grew up in a very Asian community. I didn't think anything of my rounder face because that's also what my friends looked like. It wasn't until I started interacting with outside communities that I started thinking there was something wrong with my face shape, like wrong with my flatter nose. I convinced myself I needed to lose weight, even though I'm built like a twig. It's like, I hope you're hungry for nothing. It wasn't until I got sick and I rapidly lost an unhealthy amount of weight and saw that the size and the shape of my face didn't change that I realized, oh, that's just the way my face is shaped. It's just a little rounder. Now, I think the actors for Suki and Jet are both beautiful people, but I think it's very telling that these two actors are being praised for their more mixed race presenting beauty, and the other actors, like the actress for May, is being shamed for her beautiful Southeast Asian features. I think it's very telling that all of a sudden everyone's saying the white movie actors looked better than their Asian counterparts. Some people are going to say, oh, I just wanted them to look like the cartoon. Cartoon characters are not real people. Real people have real features. And frankly, even if their faces were rounder, not because of their Asian features, even if it was because maybe they have some extra weight on their face, okay, it would still be completely unacceptable to make mean comments about it. I've seen most of these comments coming from grown men, and I think they're mad they can no longer see these child characters as sexual objects. And it's the same thing as everyone making ridiculous mean comments about Bella Ramsey's appearance, saying, oh, Ellie's supposed to be hot. Ellie is 14. Azula is 14. Stop it!
Generally, I try not to highlight these silly comments, but this one did bring up an interesting point for me. And that's because my answer is unironically yes. If you truly believe the only way that you can have your voice heard is through self-immolation for the cause that you believe in that strongly, I'm not going to tell you no. I'm not going to encourage it, but I'm not going to diminish its incredible value as an act of protest in the most radical sense. What this draws to my attention is the fact that we don't very often see the oppressor doing any radical acts to themselves for the cause that they claim they so deeply believe in. When we see people advocating for the oppressed, we get some pretty intense results. Protests, not fun rallies with fun songs and guest singers, like genuine protests that last for months. We get strikes with thousands of people calling out of school and work, disrupting the system. We get hunger strikes. We get self-immolation. We see so many intense, radical acts that come with advocating for what people believe in. We don't see the oppressor doing that. We just see them terrorizing folk. And that's because, in all honesty, I don't think it's that serious for them. I don't think that they care that much about these causes. What they care about is perpetuating their comfort. What they care about is denying accountability for their action and their roles. They don't care about their cause, if that makes any sense. So when they say funny stuff like, oh, well, I'm tired of people not condemning Hamas. Should I light myself on fire? Like some type of gotcha moment. If that's truly deep down in your heart and soul of souls, the only solution you can find to the problem, I'm not going to tell you that's not a valid act of protest. But do you feel that way? Because I don't think you do. I think that is a tool that the oppressor constantly uses to deflect from the fact that they will do anything but be accountable for the actions that they're being a part of. Like, I don't think they feel that deeply that what they're doing is right. They just want to continue doing it, even if it's wrong. I don't know. So my video where I said that I hope that Aaron Bushnell and all the other people who have self-immolated rest in peace, and that I hope that their sacrifice and that their decisions don't get overlooked in the course of all of our discourse, got taken down. Why, you may ask? For unalivement and self-injury. I don't know if I'll get it back or not. It didn't really let me appeal. That's not really the point here. What I want to call out real quick are TikTok's community guidelines surrounding those topics of self-injury
and self-unalivement. Because if the Clock app really cared about those issues, they would take a stand against the ongoing genocide of the Palestinian people, in which many Palestinians have expressed the fact that they are struggling with those ideas and with those thoughts about themselves because of the ongoing genocide. If the Clock app really cared about people injuring themselves on purpose or not, we wouldn't see these ridiculous trends coming out every couple of months encouraging people to do just that, including eating Tide Pods. We wouldn't be able to see so many comments where people say things like, I'm gonna go take a bath with a toaster, which, like, yeah, we understand is a joke, but, like, if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of it, that's exactly part of the problem, is that we all have such, like, a close relationship with the idea that we're not here anymore, and that never gets unpacked. Instead, it gets pushed as, like, comedy or relatable dark humor. But when we talk about what's actually going on, what somebody actually did, just talking about it, that gets taken down. So yeah, there isn't much that we can do about it from over here, but this is my regular reminder that TikTok can do better and should do better.
Hunter Schafer was arrested today while protesting with Jews Voices for Peace, advocating for a ceasefire in Palestine. I don't think people understand how big this is. Hunter Schafer is one of the prime A-list Gen Z stars right now. Of course, everyone knows her from Euphoria. She was in the last Hunger Games movie. She was protesting outside of the building for the Seth Meyers show. That's where Joe Biden was guest starring today. And Hunter has been an advocate for very, very important causes. She's been advocating for trans rights for years. So it's no shock that she is front and center when it comes to Palestine. Not only does it put the rest of her A-list co-stars and peers to shame, it shows that no matter what platform you got, it is worth risking it in order to stand on the right side of history. I know the trades are slowly reporting this because, listen, this is the biggest boom we've seen in like a while. Definitely looking to see how they report on this tomorrow. I know a couple of like the film sites are just now posting about it. Because again, literally, this is like breaking news. I just found out about this like probably an hour. Anyway, free my good sis.
I've talked to a lot of pedophiles in my career, and when they can't access child porn, do you know what they use? The New York Times did an investigation of child influencers. You can't have an Instagram account if you're under 13, so parents are running accounts for children. Although it's incredible to use social media to start a savings account for your kids, they can go to college and buy a house and a car, bad things are happening. Companies will send you clothing to put on your kids. If you post your kid in that outfit, you can make $3,000 on one post. Here's the problem. They looked at 5,000 child accounts and 32 million followers were adult men. Meta has disclosed that over 500,000 accounts every day have inappropriate content or interactions. When a parent posts a picture of a child and they appear more sexualized, like in a bathing suit, they get far more likes and comments from adult men. Look at my business account. You can see who's looking at you.
All right, Denis Villeneuve has yet again made some controversial media statements. Let's get into it because I love Dune Part 2 and I think this man is very brilliant. But sometimes I think maybe as artists, we let the art speak for us because I don't think this is great. So let's get into it because this is a bold statement, okay? He said, frankly, I hate dialogue. Okay. Dialogue is for theater and television. Derogatory. I don't remember movies because of a good line. I remember movies because of a strong image. I'm not interested in dialogue at all. Pure image and sound. That is the power of cinema. But it's something not obvious when you watch movies today. Movies have been corrupted by television. In a perfect world, I'd make a compelling movie that doesn't feel like an experiment, but does not have a single word in it either. People would leave the cinema and say, wait, there was no dialogue, but they won't feel the lack. So first of all, I think he's got a point. I do think that the lines have been blurred. The media lines have been blurred between TV and film for a while now. It's kind of confusing. We have this conversation about, is the MCU episodic storytelling? Are these limited series just a movie chopped up into pieces? I think, it is kind of confusing because you have artists working in both mediums and you have, companies that do both things trying to take up as much market space as possible. I definitely think that the lines have been blurred in terms of what the differences in the strengths of these two mediums of expression, of artistic expression and filmmaking. However, I think that drawing the line on dialogue as the thing that makes movies not good and TV being the problem here is misdirected frustration. Because, I mean, obviously there are a ton of lines from movies that are hugely significant, and dialogue is not a small part of the artistic process when it comes to filmmaking. You can absolutely have silent films. In fact, I don't know if he knows this, but there was a whole period of time when they did make silent films, no dialogue whatsoever. And a movie came out just last year called Robot Dreams, an animated film with no dialogue. That is something that is possible, and I do think visual storytelling is great. I also do think that the language of cinema, I think we do rely too heavily on explained exposition. I think when we talk about media literacy and the way that audiences are like kind of talked down to this way in more recent years, I think that is happening, and I think it is kind of dumbing down audiences to the point where they need things explained to them, and I don't like that. But while visual storytelling is important, like diminishing the value of dialogue and the stylistic development of how dialogue is used in storytelling, I don't think this is what he was trying to say. I think he was trying to say he has an artistic style that he has perfected, that works for him, and he wants to push it to its limit. Totally respect that. It's just weird to frame it in the TV ruined things kind of situation, because I don't think that's the case. I just generally don't love it when artists try to talk about their own work by dragging other mediums, other formats. And I don't necessarily think he was even trying to do that. I think that there's a lot of frustration in the film industry right now with the way money is spent and how it's distributed, and like the way that streamers seemingly try to like churn out endless amounts of content without putting any love or effort into it, just to like feed an endless mass and keep exponential profit growth. I genuinely think that that's where comments like this come from. I think that it's coming from a frustration and a not really understanding of other mediums, because Denis Villeneuve has never worked in TV, and I don't honestly think he'd be that great at it. They are different mediums with different strengths. That said, this is kind of a strange comment. He also said that he thinks that young people want 3+ hour movies because of the success of Oppenheimer, which I'm like, because he thinks they want an emotional connection. I don't personally think you need a 3 hour plus story in order to develop an emotional connection. Sometimes it helps, but I don't think I don't think it's the length, the duration, the runtime that's getting people in those seats. That said, Dune Part 2 is awesome, and Denis Villeneuve is very talented, and TV's great. So there you have it.
You know, it's such a shame because Brent Riviera is low-key actually, like, really cute. He just makes the corniest videos known to man, so it's hard to look past that, you know? It's tough when you're, like, 10, 12 years in the game still going, like, boys drinking coffee versus girls drinking coffee. And then the girl drinking coffee is just you with, like, a towel on your head acting, like, sassy.